From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Welcome to this week's edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis. Well, the people of Wisconsin have spoken. Yes, they have. And as is often the case when people speak through the ballot box, it isn't always clear what they said. They did say they support their governor, that's for sure, and they support some kind of fiscal reform. A majority seems to be okay with maybe curtailing union power, whatever that means. At least public sector unions anyway. But is it maybe just a little too churlish to point out that Scott Walker raised $30.5 million and Barrett raised $4 million? I mean, you know, just saying. And that almost 60% of Walker's funding was big donations that came from wealthy out-of-state Republicans, a lot of them from right here in Illinois. Okay, all right, don't be a sore loser. If you believe the exciting commentary that I saw on Fox News last night, it's now a certainty that the Romney-Walker ticket is going to surge to victory in November. But Wisconsin voters may be of two minds on that. They may be a little less enthusiastic if you believe the exit polls, but of course, can you believe the exit polls after yesterday? So on and on we go. But here in Chicago, though, the big vote is just getting underway. It's today. Will the teachers' strike authorization vote get 75%? And if they do, will it be an effective bargaining tool for the CTU? The outside funded political groups are, getting around there, coming around the table now in Chicago. They're in full swing. They're airing radio ads today against the union, and they will try to swing the tide of public opinion against the CTU. We will analyze whether or not they'll be able to do that. A lot to analyze today, and here to help us figure it all out is Lorraine Forte from Catalyst Chicago. Glad to have you back again, Lorraine. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
And joining us for the first time, and it's been way too long, and I'm glad you're finally joining us today. Curtis Black is here today from News Tips from Community Media Workshop. Glad to have you with us today. So, the big question is on my mind, and I think a lot of people today, as we see what happened in Wisconsin last night, is does it have blowback for this strike authorization vote that's going on right now? Does it cow the teachers a little bit and they say, wow, maybe the public's not behind us?
I don't think so, because what's going on today is a vote by teachers. It's not a vote by the public, a referendum on whether they do or don't support the teachers union. And, Wisconsin, people forget, tends to be, other than with, around the university, around Madison and so forth, it's kind of a conservative state. So, I'm kind of not surprised that Walker wasn't recalled. I couldn't even really recall his opponent's name at times, because I didn't hear a lot about him. But to get back to the teachers union strike vote, they're going to keep the vote going until there's a clear result, as they put it, one way or another. And you are hearing a lot of radio spots and so forth urging people to curb the teachers and say, wait.
Sign this
but
petition.
Yeah, but if you're the union, because you now have to get 75%, you want the vote to take place before school lets out. And, the Senate Bill 7, people say, well, we'll make it harder for teachers to strike, but that pushed the union to mobilize and really get their people fired up.
Well, you're already sort of laying out a whole lot of us a lot of stuff for us to chew here. So Senate Bill 7 and the influence of people from Oregon, from think tanks out of state, all of that stuff. We got to get into that today. But Curtis, I just want to get I want to try to get a take from you on what happened in Wisconsin last night. Is it a sea change? Is Wisconsin changing from red to blue? Are we seeing the whole body politic completely change in front of our very eyes?
Well, there's some big changes going on. I think it's the first partisan contest after Citizens United. There's all this money that came in that really succeeded in changing the story, because I think the real story is that you have a governor who went after unions, cut public spending, cut public services, and didn't produce jobs the way he promised. And they kind of, with all that money, they turned that narrative completely around. Now
They did, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I was driving into CanTV this morning on the Kennedy Expressway, and I was behind the caravan of Tea Party Express buses, I guess, coming back from Milwaukee or something, off to the next battleground. Right. And I was just so impressed with the money, the money that was just sort of falling out of the back doors of these buses. Just beautifully appointed things, and this one of them was just one bus, was just the call center, the Tea Party Express mobile call center.
See, this is a big difference between the Democratic and Republican Party. The Republican Party is very solicitous of its base, and there's a lot of money behind its base. The Democratic Party sort of tries to distance itself from its base, and its money seems to be sort of more coming from the middle.
Yeah.
And the Republican base has really figured out a way to keep its politicians accountable.
You have to admire that.
Yeah.
I mean, in a weird sort of way, you really have to admire the organization, because, I mean, it's funny. I had the same kind of thought. I was thinking, where is the leftward version of the Tea Party Express?
Because
bus
they
caravan?
didn't run. Barrett didn't raise as much money. I mean, nearly as much.
Barrett didn't have as much time. He didn't focus on the issues that were highlighted last year. But I think you have to recognize that occupation of the State House in Madison was a tremendous event, and there's a lot of energy behind that represents a really widespread sentiment. But the unions have been sort of tied to the Democratic Party, and it's a question of whether they'll put more resources into these grassroots organizing efforts that would work to hold Democratic and other politicians accountable.
I don't want to get too far beyond this. Again, I know this sounds like, sore loser people sitting around talking, licking their wounds the day after. But I think it's important to point out that Tom Barrett, and I didn't even really understand this until about 2 or 3 days ago, was confined to $10,000 contributions because he's an incumbent mayor. I don't even understand the law.
Because that's a candidate's limit unless you're subject to recall. So one candidate who's subject to recall has no limits.
So
it's
Scott
just
Walker
bizarre
could raise
loophole
all of the Americans United money that he wanted.
He got
from
checks
everywhere.
for $500,000.
And Barrett couldn't do that. So I mean that is
100,000.
Yeah, it must be at least noted that both hands were tied behind the backs.
Well, and then the Senate in Wisconsin went Democratic. So the GOP can't be.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that the Illinois General Assembly just passed a law to, as a response to the super PAC money, to lift the limits in local and statewide races if super PACs are spending a certain amount of money. And the campaign finance groups are calling on the governor to veto that. They say there's better ways to address that problem.
That's a very interesting issue. I lost the thought that I was just going to, because there was something I wanted to get into. Well, anyway, we have, Curtis, you said something I think really significant just now. I was listening earlier this morning to an NPR discussion about how the Wisconsin race was kind of the equivalent of the Spanish War before World War II, that it was kind of this proxy war that led. I have a feeling that that's not the exact analogy. It's more like what you were talking about. We have just seen the first, almost like we're seeing the first of the cyber wars happening right now with drone attacks. We're seeing the first of a new kind of warfare, a new kind of politics. And this was the first election that really was driven by this kind of PAC money, these I will call them shadowy groups on both sides that are very difficult to define. And they can pour just loads and loads of money, and they have their friends, their hand is in the glove of the media, which just loves that money just rolling in. We were talking earlier about if you have $30 million to spend in Wisconsin, USA, okay? You've got Madison, you've got Milwaukee, those are your media markets. You can buy every radio and TV station, you can gridlock Wisconsin for $30 million. How can you not have an impact on the body politic and on the public opinion if that's the kind of resources that you have that have never been there before. Okay, that wasn't a question, was it?
It's rhetorical.
But it is something that, and I'm not saying that in a partisan way. It just appears to me that we are in a whole different world right now. That if you can't raise equivalent amounts of giga money, then your message isn't heard. And I think what I was going to ask you before was, I was at a couple of those rallies in Wisconsin, in Madison, and they were very emotional, very highly charged. Actually, I have to say they were almost kind of fun. There were people who were, you could see, were just really enjoying themselves. But there was no question about the fact that as the media people like to say, the optics of it were just fantastic, right? You have this, like all the people hanging off the rafters.
Huge crowds.
But even then, I was standing talking to my friends and saying, I wonder if this is real. I mean, I wonder how this plays in Wauwatosa, or how this plays way up in the North Woods when ordinary people from Wisconsin are watching this. They're saying, these people, they're not me. They're not. This isn't real. This is a media market phenomenon in, liberal, saturated Madison. Was that true?
I suppose anyone would read into it the way what they brought to it, and I guess there was an awful lot of attempts to cast it as outside agitators.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, did the influence of outside money change the narrative so much that it changed the electorate, it changed the way they voted, or was it always that way and we weren't noticing it because the optics were so bright?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. If you just look at Scott Walker's record, it's not a great record. And they turned it around to make it look like he's a really courageous, tough guy who's making progress for the state, and he's not really making progress for the state. So I think, I don't know how much of anyone's political analysis is reality-based, but to the extent that it is.
Again, I'm sorry.
And and then if you have an opponent who has what, 1/4 or 1/5 to spend, and you don't know anything about him, unless you really pay attention, it is hard to filter out things, even if what's being fed to you is wrong. If you keep hearing it over and over and over, sooner or later you start to believe, well, maybe they're right, because you're not hearing anything else.
I have friends in Wisconsin who had been saying for some time that if Barrett becomes the candidate, it's going to be a problem because he's really not very electric. He does not stand up well to that.
And there was no money to make it.
And with no money.
No money to create an image of him.
Because after all, as we know, it's all what you
right. I mean, at least to pump him up somewhat.
All right, so let's get back to this CTU vote. There are lots and lots of media statements out there today, siding essentially with the certainly editorials in both the big newspapers, siding with Jean-Claude Brizard and the mayor against the CTU and saying this is wrong. They're authorizing a strike before they even have seen the details of the contract.
And these are the same people who pushed for the state legislation that raised the threshold to authorize a strike. So if you're a union and you say, gee, now we have to get 75%, you're going to do what it takes to get 75% because that's your bargaining chip. And for them to say, and it's a war on both sides. I mean, the union is saying, we need this strike vote now. No, there's no final proposal on the table, but we need to have the vote now before people leave for the summer. And the district and the city are doing what they can because, they may have thought, oh, the union will never get 75%, but teachers are pissed off, and they may very well get 75%.
Well, at the CTU press conference the other day, they were saying quite confidently that they thought they would get to 75% today. They may get it today.
And it could be today. It could be in the next couple days. But just for an example, just to give an example, one of the things is being said is like it's just the older teachers who want to strike. It's not the younger teachers. The younger teachers understand quote unquote merit pay, whatever. Just coincidentally, I met a young woman who's a teacher at a North Side school. She's actually a librarian teacher, a North Side school in kind of middle class neighborhood. We started talking, and you know, I told her who I was and what I did, and she started talking to me about how pissed off all the teachers are at her school. She said, don't believe that we, the young teachers, you know, even though she's a librarian, she still vote. She said, don't believe that we don't want to strike because we feel very disrespected, and we feel, okay, we know we're not going to necessarily get 30% raise, but for them to offer us basically no raise at the time, and to kind of, they feel like everything that's wrong with the schools is blamed on the teachers, and it's, so they're just pissed off.
You know, I think there's a certain defensiveness, or you know, all this pushback, all these editorials, the radio ads. It might be. It seems to me like a sort of desperation, because I think that they're not in the Mayor Emanuel and CPS are not in the position they thought they would be. I think their strategy may have backfired. They really set up this for a whole year as a confrontation. You know, the longer school day issue as a win-lose proposition, as a confrontation. And today now we see that parents, Chicagoans support the CTU over the mayor on the longer school day, and 92% of Chicago parents think that that teachers should be compensated for a longer day, which is one of the basic issues. So
there was an interesting. I would say there's a possibility it was a miscalculation, because I think Mayor Emanuel had some very quick victories early on in some of his labor negotiations. I'm thinking about stuff like with sanitation workers, this thing about cross-training, we've talked about a lot on the show here, cross-training sanitation workers, taking away some of these little things like, you know, 20 minutes for setting up the truck, those kind of, let's just call them low-hanging fruit, okay? Right. All of us in Chicago for decades have all been complaining about some of the work rules that exist there. He came in a position of strength and had some quick victories in those areas. And perhaps he thought that the teachers were going to be the same kind of thing, and maybe that's not what's happening. I don't know.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
No, I wonder if he thought that SB 7 was some kind of inoculation against the strike.
Well,
but I also wonder if, I mean, it almost seems like there's some other agenda here. It's not a Chicago concentric agenda. He's trying to project something maybe nationally, that he's a tough guy. He cracked down on the teachers. He forced this down their throat. If he was just wanted a longer school day, he would have sat down and said, how do we do this? This gets really weird and almost conspiratorial, and I'll just claim it before I even say it. But I recommend Roz Rossi's piece in the Sun-Times today about something that I hadn't realized, which is that all these radio and TV spots that we're seeing today, these anti-CTU spots, were designed and placed by AKPD Media, which of course is David Axelrod's old firm. Now, he's not technically involved with it anymore, but we all know that AKP, as it was known then, when it was Axelrod, basically is connected at the spine to the Obama administration. So Obama's people are working with Rahm Emanuel and Jean-Claude Brizard to put anti-CTU radio and TV spots on the media today. Well, isn't that interesting? Well,
and then also you have these other, you know, groups that there's a lot of suspicion of among some people. You know, Stand for Children, which started in Oregon as really a grassroots parent group, and now it's become this thing that's funded from, you know, rich people like Sam Zell and so forth, and they're one of the people that are saying, oh, you know, this don't vote because you don't know what but I understand that you don't know what the proposal is, but to think that the union is basically going to slit its own throat and not vote is kind of it's
you know, this connection also goes back to that thing about the Democrats and their base, because the teachers union used to be really central to the Democratic Party, and something's happening here where you know, the New York Times has a story about how how education reform is the new hobby of the hedge fund managers.
And they are the people
based
who are
on
funding
things that have never been proven research-wise, but sound good. They sound good, but there's really no research.
Dear
behind
viewer,
it.
I could forgive you for kind of rolling your eyes and saying, why don't these people just shut up about this and move on to something else? But you know what? This to me is the most interesting thing that's going on right now, because you are seeing some tectonic shifts in the political plates here. And one of the areas that I just think that is not getting enough analysis, again, goes right back, Curtis, to what you were talking before about the even greater influence of deep pockets money in the process, in the whole political process, not just elections. And this is one of these things. Stand for Children, as you said, starts as a kind of an Oregon grassroots group. Suddenly you have Jonah Edelman, right? Jonah Edelman is in a year ago.
National Geographic.
May I just digress and just say I also really want to recommend Mark Brown's column from yesterday in the Sun-Times. If you really want to see this thing put in some perspective, he's the only guy in the mainstream media that I know of who's been talking about this. Jonah Edelman and his group comes to Springfield a year ago. They push through this SB7. Which in essence ties tied the hands behind the back of the CTU, saying we're going to really nail their asses because you're going to have to get 75% of your entire membership, but not retired people and retirees, right? So there's no way they're going to get 75%, including retirees. And now all of a sudden, they're on the verge of possibly doing this, and it's sending these same people into apoplexy, and now they're spending their money to put ads on
if
against
they did not believe that it was possible, there would not be the money spent on all
and
this.
I want to say that I am raising these issues in a kind of an agnostic way. It's not I'm not necessarily saying that this is a pro-union or anti-union thing. It's just bothering the heck out of me to see that our processes are being run by a few deep pockets people who want to set the agenda. And they sit on the school board. They run the school board. They are the people who are funding Mayor Emanuel. So we are,
and the protesters who come out to support.
Let's not forget the
school
rent protester people.
Right, who are being paid. But I just think it's really important to me, it's incredibly important for the citizenry to be informed about this, and to not just buy into this notion that the CTU is just jumping the gun and trying to get a strike vote before they've seen. They have seen what the school board has put down, and they see that there is only one very small window where they could hold a strike vote, or a strike authorization vote. I'm doing it too. A strike authorization, where they can not only get the active teachers, but also the retirees, because they've got, and again, may we say this again, they have to get 75% of the membership, not 75% of the people voting. And that's a very important distinction.
And what this vote would do would just put them in a position that they'd have to be respected and dealt with.
Yes,
right. Not just
and I also think that were there to be a strike here in September, there would be there's going to be a lot of pressure from Team Obama on the powers that be in Chicago to not have a strike and to have a settlement.
So they're being strategic and they're being smart. They're saying, we are up against this incredible phalanx of deep-pocketed special interest people who want to see us, our wings clipped. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, we better put up our best defense. And our best defense right now is to have in our pocket a strike authorization, which you didn't think we could possibly get. So there you are. All right, you just saw we got the 5-minute warning here. Pensions are what this is all about. And Curtis, you have written. I don't know how to
explain pensions in 30 seconds or less.
I've been recommending stuff for you. I've given you guys so much to do just watching. But you've also got to check out, Curtis. You got to check out News Tips.
Newstips.org.
You did newstips.org. You did a very cool piece recently about the pension mess in Illinois and the sort of the budget mess. And I don't know. I mean, it's a disservice to you, but take a couple of minutes and walk us through it.
Well, I don't
and
know.
explain it all to
Yes,
us, will
yes.
you, please?
I'm
I
not going to
know.
explain pensions
Right.
to you, except that the concept that the pension funding shortfall is driving the budget crisis is backwards. It's the budget crisis driving the pension crisis, because you know, what we had was years and years ago the politicians figured out how to do this, where they'd pay a little bit and then they'd pay a lot more, and here we are where we're paying a lot more. And the real problem is that we don't have a revenue system that works. We're the only state in the region that has a flat income tax, and as it works out, it's very regressive, especially when you consider sales taxes and property taxes. People at the bottom 20% of the income scale pay twice as much as people at the top 20%.
In Illinois.
In state and local taxes. And so, and especially as you know, the income inequality grows, and there's more money up here that we're not getting at, and we're concentrating getting revenue from the bottom where there's less and less money. If we had a progressive income tax, like if we just took Iowa's tax and put it on Illinois, we'd have $6 billion more a year. You know.
And the people of Iowa seem okay with it, as far as we know.
They're proud of their schools, I believe.
Right, yeah, yeah.
So, there's a push coming, I think, for a constitutional amendment. And what I'm saying here, and it's maybe taking a leap of faith, is that it's inevitable. There's no alternative, to quote Margaret Thatcher. And the push here is going to be for a modest progressive income tax that would actually cut the rate for the vast majority of taxpayers. Yeah.
Well,
and it's going to happen. You heard it here first.
I seriously do recommend check out newstips.org and read it, because it's one of those things that you have. It's here. I have it in small print right here. Okay, so it takes a minute to read and digest, and it's worth doing. In the few seconds that we have left, I thought it would be interesting to confer an occasional award that we have here on the program for public relations in the moment, or something. Or maybe this should be the award for most ridiculous statement by an elected official in 2012 so far, and no one's gonna compete with this. Pete Silvestri, speaking of our police chief, said, "Congratulations, Superintendent." They met at the county board yesterday. "I saw you on the mountain, and I think it was Michigan Avenue at one point. There was a mound, and you were standing there, and it kind of reminded me of George Washington," he said, "as all you needed was a horse and a sword. You protected us. You kept us free." Thank you, Pete. Appreciate that. We'll send the award in the mail when we raise enough money to put a stamp on it. Okay, this has been a really interesting conversation, and it is only just the very tip of the iceberg, because everything is all interconnected. But I do think that you guys have raised some very interesting points, though, about the fact that our conversation has been distorted by people who have
big pockets of various kinds affecting elections, trying to affect union elections. I mean, it's all interconnected, if not conspiratorial.
Not conspiratorial. We will take up this and many other things on future editions of Chicago Newsroom, which, of course, you've been watching here on CAN TV, which is a community service of CAN TV. You can find the program right here on cable, but you can also see us online if you just go to this very address right here. You can watch us anytime. And you can also access us on iTunes, and you can subscribe to the audio podcast, which I would very much like you to do. I'm Ken Davis. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again right here next week on CAN TV, and I hope you'll be right back here on CAN TV too. See you then. Bye.